Welcome to Couve.com. I'm David Madore. We have Glenn Olson with us today. Glenn is the Deputy Administrator for Clark County, and also you are quite the expert when it comes to budgeting. I found your presentation to be very interesting. You actually have had among the county commissioner-elects that were just last month stand up and give you 2 standing ovations for what insight you brought to us, because I thought we have to let the community see what you have presented because of the tug of war between public funds and private and the way that the private world works. I thought that is very good insight. So welcome, Glenn.
Oh, thank you.
And you have a presentation that we can just jump right into because there's a lot of information here, and I'm looking forward to walking through this with you.
Great. Thank you. Well, should I start?
Yeah, jump right in.
So what we're starting with today is entitled Exactly Correctly, County Budgeting, the Perspective of Budget Writers. The reason I say perspective of budget writers is because there are many perspectives on how we spend money in a county. And I needed to share with the commissioners that Mr. Madore referred to, who are all new, and most of who had very little experience, if any, with how a county develops its funds. I wanted to share with them how the people who are really making the recommendations to them think about budgeting. So this is truly, I will honestly say, a biased presentation, but it's biased by the people that are doing the recommending. So it's legitimate bias.
Yes, and I would like to add to that the budgeting office, which is really, or should I say the department, is the commissioner's best friend. Bob in the budgeting office said, we're kind of the bulldogs. We make sure that we pull for the taxpayer, and it's really true. I love the budgeting office because you're not trying to spend more. You're trying to actually make sure that those tax dollars are spent thrifty and resourcefully and effectively. And I'm really falling in love with the guys in the budgeting office because they're pulling on the right end of the rope.
We are civil servants. We are stewards of the public trust, and we take that very seriously. What I have here initially is just a series of definitions. I'll go through them very rapidly. This is a fairly in-depth presentation, and so I'm going to focus on the areas that look more like where we see our problems and solutions. But it is important to understand that we are not structured in the same way that you might typically think a business is structured. One of the things that's different is our whole finance function is divided into pieces by the state constitution. One of the things I do when I talk with groups of commissioners is I define some of the most basic terms that we all think we understand. The first one that you see here on the screen, the definition of finance, comes out of my old college dictionary. Notice that just the second definition there, the disposition of public revenues by a government, is key. Finance is understood to mean as one of its main definitions as how we spend money in a government.
In other words, disposition, define the word.
How we dispose of, or how we distribute, or how we allocate funds.
Okay.
So let's break down county financial management. This is true for all the counties in the state of Washington. There are some variances depending upon whether a county is what they call a charter county or not, but they all work like this. Every county has an elected treasurer. Or most counties have an elected treasurer, I should say, with very rare exceptions. And in all cases, the treasurer does these 3 functions. They handle tax and revenue collections, so they are the ones that are responsible for sending your property tax bills, for example. Mm-hmm. I might add, the property tax bills that they send to you collect about 10% of our money, and 90% of that bill is for the state and for schools and many other people. We collect money for all of the property taxes in the county.
So more than what's used by the county, you're really the collection agency for these citizens that fall within our jurisdiction here, but send much of that to the state and schools and other entities.
Correct. We are the actual on-the-ground collector, but we do not get all that money. We always like people to know that. Mm-hmm. The Treasurer's Office handles debt. That's a big deal in a government because we often are using debt for the big capital construction projects that we have, sometimes road construction, but more often buildings and things like that. Mm-hmm. And they are our investment and banking services. And actually, the Clark County Treasurer is probably, by number of investors or dollars invested, is probably one of the biggest banks in the county, if not the biggest. Mm-hmm. We have an accountant or accounting department. accounting function. It's in the auditor's department, and they do all of our financial record keeping, as you might expect. They also do all of our financial reporting, which is voluminous because we not only report everything that a business might, but we also have to report to the state auditor's office. We have a financial auditing function and performance auditing functions there as well. And then finally, we have a budget function, which you mentioned I'm in charge of, which is the forward-looking or prospective piece of finance and accounting. And that's where we do appropriation planning, how we're going to spend the money, which I mentioned here later. We handle all of the expense and revenue forecasts. We're the ones who take a look at where we think our expenditures are going to be in the next 2 to 6 years. And we do work on time frames about like that. We do performance measurement. It's a part of the budget process. And then we ultimately create something called a line item budget, which is an extremely detailed document for how we are going to spend our money.
Mm-hmm. And so before that money is ever spent, there's a lot of homework that goes in. And it goes into pretty much a fine detail, line item detail that says over the next 2 years, we're going to be allocating this amount to these different departments. And even within those departments, it's pretty well specified, and that becomes law. Right? That says that's how much you can use, and you really can't spend outside of those categories. And if there's going to be some exceptions or things that need to move around, you can't just simply move it around. There's a process that needs to be followed in order to ensure that we're on track. And the budgeting office is not just setting a budget; they are the watchdogs that for every week. I don't know how often. They are tuned into every expenditure to make sure that it's in line, and they'll put the brakes on. They'll stop. They'll talk. They'll discuss and bring to the attention of the commissioners or the department heads any corrections that need to be made if something looks like this is a little questionable here, or something needs to be some shift of priorities. Right?
Yes, that process does all of that and more. Again, the budget office will look more prospectively about where you plan on spending your money. If the money's actually walking through the system, oftentimes it's the accounting function that's going to catch it before it gets overspent, or it's inappropriate, or it's in the wrong place. We're very limited on how we can spend money from one fund to benefit another, that sort of thing. It's rather complicated. I think the thing I'd end this slide with is your mention about the budget being a law. It is. It's a resolution. It's adopted. This is true in all governments. And we call that an appropriation. And when you appropriate funds, you really have done something that is unique. Private businesses don't do that. The best way I can explain that is a very, very short story. My brother has sold big information systems on the West Coast to governments. He had the government sector. He called me after being in that job about 3 months, and he said, well, I've learned 2 things. He said, you all have budgets, and you follow them. And it's true.
Yeah, and you're required to follow them. So, which is careful watching of every category is. I find that refreshing when it comes to, as a commissioner, charged to make sure that you get the most bang for the buck, that we're being wise stewards of it, that there is a very good process in place to make sure that it's well thought out and that we're staying on track.
We're double checked on everything. Now I'm going to go through 3 slides that cover the same agencies again: the treasurer, the auditor, and the budget office. I'll go through them quickly, but I'll make some mention here. The county treasurer is an executive branch department, and it is really responsible for the collection of monies and for debt.
So this is an elected position.
Correct. We have an elected treasurer, Doug Lasher, and
he's been in there for decades.
Doug is, at least, he's right up there. I think the sheriff may have been in office longer, but that would be the only one. And it comes from the old French word treasure. I like etymologies. I like to know where words come from. So the county treasurer is the person in charge of that.
What you said? What comes? Treasurer comes from a French word that.
The French word for treasure.
Budget is the French word for. Oh, for treasure, treasurer. Okay, got it.
Got it.
All right.
These are the functions of the county treasurer. Very quickly, they are the steward of funds for all of the local governments in the area. We are the ones that keep track of their money. We invest their cash for them. We make sure we're their bank. We collect property and other taxes. We do also collect past due amounts. We sell bonds, which means we incur debt for the county. We also sell surplus county property. The treasurer does.
As you're walking down through here. Yeah, go ahead and point, kind of help us to navigate as we go here.
Accounting for and reporting the funds that they manage. but it's not the county's accountant. They only account for their own funds. And they can be appointed by as an official or a county official in a charter county, and I'm not going to get into that yet, but I will cover charter counties later. So this can be an appointed position. It usually isn't. I think we have 5 charter counties out of 39 in the state. So 34 of the counties all follow this rule.
Okay, so that which was interesting that Washington State has what they call a uniform form of county government that says all the county governments are the same unless they elect to become a charter county. Correct. And Clark County is one of 34, right?
34 what we call RCW or code counties.
Which are basically the original form that was spelled out in the Constitution. So we basically are going by that form of government. That's been like, 100 years or so, right?
Oh, longer, 1880s. And Clark County is the oldest county in the state of Washington. Clark County existed before the state existed.
Well, I did not even know that.
Clark County was incorporated in 1845, I believe. It went from Wenatchee to the coast to Alaska.
Wow, one big
was
county.
when they split the Oregon Territory in half.
And now we have 39, and the budgets for each county, they're very different sizes and geographic and dollar-wise, they're very different. You have counties that have a tiny budget and a few counties that are very large, and Clark County's budget is about $460-some million per year, close to $500 million a year, which is close to about $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the county each year, right?
That's about right, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Although a lot of that money comes from outside the county, just so you know. But
like
that is
from
correct.
The Fed, from the
we
state.
get federal grants that come in. We get state monies that come in. And it's a very correct statement to say the money that comes in from outside still is paid by taxpayers. That is a true statement. But we still feel as if we're doing our best fiscal stewardship by going and getting those dollars, because if we don't get them for Clark County citizens, somebody else does.
Yes, and that's something that is a whole topic by itself, because we want to make sure that I see it as a little bit of a bait that says that if you do this, you're going to get this amount of money that usually comes with some kind of a match that says, we'll give you 80% if you supply 20% to do something that maybe in the long run it really doesn't make much sense compared to the other priorities that we can choose from. So that discernment has to go in there to say, is this really something we want to sign up for? Yeah. And quite often it comes with an obligation to continue something that you started, and years later you wonder, why are we doing what we're doing? Well, it's because we took money years earlier and we got to keep spending it now, even though the grant went away. So it's that can be tempting, but we have to make sure that it really does make sense in the long run.
It does, and you make a very good point. We're in the budget office, we're wary of that, and generally the rule is we try to find the grant monies for the things we have to do anyway. By far and away, our largest grant recipient is roads. We're going to build them anyway. We might as well get some federal support for them.
Which is great. I love transportation infrastructure, and when we can get something to help lighten that load, it makes the miles go further, right?
That's right. So that's the treasurer. We have another elected official called the county auditor by name of Greg Kimsey this time around, and Greg's been there for quite a while as well. The county auditor, actually, his main duty, although he does some auditing, is not auditing, so it's a little bit of a misnomer. But what the auditor does do is track expenses. Yeah. Auditors also have some expenses here. They have some very important functions. The auditor believes are very important functions. They spend a lot of time on elections. Elections is a very big business. It's a very difficult thing to do correctly, and you want to make sure it's right every time. They do recording. That's recording of licenses, recording of marriage licenses, recording of real estate deeds, that sort of thing. They do licensing, auto licensing. We are a major agent here in Southwest Washington for the Department of Licensing for the state. We can do some things here that few other agents can do. We're a Department of Revenue agent. That means that we function as an agent of the Department of Revenue, which is an oversight agency for much of the work that we do in the state of Washington. We are also the state auditor's office supervisor. What that means is we have virtually a full-time team of people from the state auditor's office who live in our building and are always either in the middle of setting up for or finishing up audits for us. They interact solely or they interact primarily with the auditor's office and the finance director. Who
in that capacity, they're actually book checkers. They're actually ensuring that we're doing things right. Things add up. There's nothing that's going on that is questionable.
The state auditor? Absolutely. We are audited continuously.
And I might add that the county auditor, Greg Kimsey, has been a huge help to me. If I want to be able to ask for the line item details of this or records going back in the past, whether it be a financial or election kind of audits, he'll provide for me all of that detail in Excel, and I can just learn all that there is about that. He's just been a huge resource to open the eyes of commissioners, be able to understand perspective, where we're at in comparison to our history, to our trends, to other agencies and other locations. It's a good reference point to be able to know where are we, because numbers by themselves to me, they mean nothing, zero, unless you can compare where we're at compared to where we were, see the long-term trend, and where are we with respect to other reference points. Then you have some idea of where situation awareness.
You're absolutely correct. The state, and actually the auditor's office, in all fairness to them, have by far the largest bulk of the finance function. They keep all the books, they keep all the history, they do produce that very, very excellent, not only just last year, but they'll give you a trend. They do analyses, they understand how these things all fit together, they do our CAFR, our County Annual Financial Report at the end of the year. It's a very large function, and they're very, very good at what they do.
Yes, and they also, if you get elected to county commissioner, you're not just assumed that you're going to start making policy without knowing each of your departments or the resources. So the process that I've been going through as a newly elected commissioner has been really educational. I sit down and I pick the brain and get oriented and understand little by little each one of these departments. As I sat down with Greg Kimsey again just the other day, and discovered that they work very closely with the Washington State Archives. There's a huge facility out, where is it, in Yakima area?
You're up one on me there. I didn't know that.
Well, there is the best electronic state-of-the-art archive facility, I think, in the United States for any kind of except for federal, any kind of agency, any kind of a government on any level, and all of those records get sent there. And so it serves as a backup for the county. It serves as a backup for any of the forms of government within Washington State. And because some of these records, a lot of the records need to be kept forever. Marriage license, deeds, you name it, they all have to be stored somewhere. So the county has their storage, but also the Central Archive, a monstrous database, electronic state-of-the-art database, also keeps track of all that stuff. And the key behind that is not just to store it, but to make sure you can retrieve it with searchable, useful information. Because unless you can retrieve that stuff, then it's just data, and it's just you could never find it again.
Right.
But they do a very good job of providing intelligence to that when it does get stored.
The auditor also has two statutory functions that I've listed at the bottom of the page. The clerk of the board, which alternately may be appointed by the board as a separate position, which most larger counties do, and which Clark County has done. They also are responsible for preparing what we call the preliminary budget. I'll show you later. There's a schedule that we go through when we prepare a budget that's outlined in statute. That also, the preparation of the preliminary budget, is alternately can be performed by appointed officials that the Board of County Commissioners, or the BOCC, chooses. And that's also something we've done in Clark County. Usually there's a transition that happens as counties grow larger, that the boards of county commissioners take those responsibilities closer to themselves because
More specialization.
There's more specialization, exactly.
Yes, and as clerk of the board of Clark County, that is a very important, that's actually a person that works very closely when you have a commissioner meeting, a hearing meeting. That person is, in our case, she's sitting at that's Rebecca, she's sitting at the right side of the commissioners. A lot of times they don't even realize who is there. Yeah. But she makes sure that the agenda is all set up, make sure that the minutes are taken, that the
notices are given.
All the logistics.
All
There's
the logistics.
a very important position.
Yeah, and it has to be done according to code, so it is important. Accounting definition. This is one that I have, again, pulled out of my college dictionary. Accounting, the word, means the discipline of measuring, recording, communicating, and interpreting financial activity, and it comes from the Latin word, not surprisingly, to count. And that is exactly what our accountants do. It's important to recognize that in this complex three-part structure that we have for running finance and accounting, that accounting is primarily retrospective. They are looking back.
Okay.
And that is their main function.
Which means trends. You have to know where you are coming from and where is that long-term trend, because that can indicate where you're going, and perhaps you could be running into a future that's unsustainable.
Correct.
So that retrospective, where you're looking back in your rearview mirror, that or your 50,000-foot level, very important. So I very much respect that side of this.
And most often, to be very fair to the auditor's office, back is only very recently back, because they are also keeping track of the flow of money as it moves through the county. They are always ensuring that every single expenditure is an appropriate expenditure, that we're not running over one of many budgets that we have for funds, so that we don't end up in a situation of ever overexpending a dollar, which is actually illegal.
In the current budget. But as a commissioner, I keep asking. I want to see the longer term trend. I want to be able to know where we're at compared to where we were 10, 15 years ago, so that we can see if that's when your long term. That's when the differences over time really show up. They accumulate. So
Right.
that is something that with short change, it's kind of like watching your kids grow. You don't see the change, but over a period of 10 years, whoa, then you see the change.
Absolutely, and they're good at both. So generally what the auditor does includes financial record keeping, financial reporting. This is for the finance function. This is not elections or many other important things they do. They do some financial auditing, and they do some performance auditing for us. Then there's the county budget office, and that is really what we're here to talk about today. So the auditor's office, or the board appointee who does that work, if it's a charter county, is responsible for the recommended budget and the budget process, which includes policy analysis. So we're looking through what is policy going to do? Not how do we make policy, but how do we do the analysis to support the policy makers? That would be you. We do strategic planning, which is thinking ahead longer than the next paycheck, so to speak, or the next revenue collection, but where are we going to be in 2 years, or are we going to be in 6 years if we follow this course versus that course?
I love definitions of words, and two of those words that are related to each other is tactics, or tactical, and strategic, or strategy. Tactical being perhaps that's the current budget that says these are the short-term implementing steps that we're doing to accomplish a goal. Strategy has to do with the long-term perspective of where you want to go in the ultimate destination, and also look at in hindsight that retrospective, where have we come from? So it's the long-term strategic, short-term tactical.
And highly related, closely related, I should say, to the strategic planning process is expenditure and revenue forecasting that you see here. Forecasting is an extremely important function in government, because we work on much longer time frames than quarterly, for example, that a business might work on. We really are, think about it, if we've been here since 1845 or 1844, I did the math here recently, Clark County's been here 168 years. It'll probably be here in 168 years. Those are the kind of time frames that we have to think about sometimes, but certainly 20 and 30 years is not out of the picture for us. These forecasts become crucial in our understanding where we're going. Also because we are forecasting a different dynamic in a business, in a private sector business. Your revenues and your expenditures are going to depend heavily upon how your market changes. My market changes at 1% to 2% per year, because that's how fast our county population grows. And so we have a very different take on how our life may look, and we can do actually rather precise forecasting. So to do the strategic planning that we're called upon to do, we have to build these forecasts. Clark County is fortunate that we have a forecasting function. Many counties can't, because it's very technical and it's expensive. But we put that into our budget process, and it's been very worth it for us.
It's kind of your forward scout if you're making a journey, you got your Forward Scout to be able to say what's coming. And the sustainability really is a big issue. If we have, let's say, a traffic signal that's 10 seconds short on every cycle, and then you got traffic that's going to just simply increase, and the line's going to queue's getting longer and longer and longer because there's no course correction. Versus that feedback that looks ahead and say, we're going to run into trouble if we keep doing what we're doing. Let's modify that. So that is very important to be able to tune things up as you go, minor course corrections. I also like to say that the county budget office, that department, is at least for Clark County, located on the same floor as the county commissioner's offices, so that we can just walk across the hallway, sit down in a handy way, be able to say, what do you think about this and this? Talk to me, help us to understand on a pretty close-knit basis. That is I value that. You don't even have to go to another floor, make an appointment, whatever. I walk into the budget to Bob's office and say, okay, Bob, help me here with each agenda item, and how can we accomplish something to be able to shift something from this priority to that priority. The staff has been there years, and they have a long-term perspective and history that is rich to draw from. So I value that insight very much.
That was deliberate.
I like
Absolutely. So with those tools, we do financial planning prospectively for the Board of County Commissioners for their approval. We do capital expense planning. We do performance measurement. And all of that comes together into what we call the line item detail.
Yeah,
That's how we build a budget.
And the capital expense basically means you're going to buy big, expensive stuff. Or you're going to buy stuff, what's the threshold? What do we call capital here?
I think we have a $5,000 threshold, but really when we're talking about a capital budget, we're talking about roads and buildings. Those are the two major capital expenditures that we have. Sometimes you might think about big information equipment.
So capital has multiple term definitions in our English language. In this case, the context is when we talk about capital, we're talking about big expenditures for projects or big expenditures for stuff.
Right, that are not operating. It's going to outlast any given certain fiscal cycle.
If it has a long life, then it's a capital expenditure.
Exactly. All of these tasks, when you build a budget, have to be performed. But often, they're only done implicitly. And when I say often, I mean you can look in many governments around the country, and you'll see that every one of these things happens, but sometimes they're happening in the back of an analyst's brain, on the back of an envelope. We're very explicit about that here in Clark County. Every single step is explicit, laid out, and we try to document it.
And I might add, too, that the fact that a budget is set up ahead of time that says we're going to allocate this much for this department to be able to spend in these categories, it does not mean that they must spend that money. For instance, in one case, when you have elections and you get new people that come in, they kind of inherit a budget that's already been approved. And so the question is, how do you shift priorities from one area to another? For instance, I want to remove all the park fees, the entrance fees for our parks. Well, that money's got to come from somewhere. And in this case, we had the money that's been allocated for Peter Van Noordwijk's department as the assessor. He was able to save $500,000. So we actually invited, hey, David, you want to save the park fees? I just saved $500,000. Even though it's in my budget, we're not going to spend it, and that does happen. And so you do have good people within. We have a lot of good people. In fact, my exposure to the staff coming in, I didn't know what to expect. People have a stereotype of what they expect government employees to be, and I can tell you that my experience in getting to know the staff, they're stellar. They're amazing. We have some fabulous people on staff, and it's a real encouraging discovery as a new guy coming in from the outside and finding out what it's like on the inside. Great people, and there is not this, I haven't found this mentality that says we either hurry up and spend it or we won't get it next year kind of thing. Instead, it's people that really care about the community, and they are there long term. There are so many people that have been there for decades, really, 20 and 30 years, and because they care, and they're part of they have the kind of makeup that really is envious. Clark County is very, very healthy county. And so many of the other counties look to Clark County to see how you guys do it. Well, the key is good people.
Yeah, we're proud of Clark County. It's unique among counties in the state. And I will tell you, there are many people going to be very happy to hear you saying how wonderful they are. And I might add that,
it's genuine.
As we go to the next slide here, part of the reason that monies in Clark County don't just get spent is because we have something called budget policies. And among the budget policies is if you haven't spent 10% of your budget, that doesn't mean next year you're automatically going to lose it. It will be put back into your budget, and you can save it again next year. That money goes back to the general fund. It won't get wasted. It won't get expended because they're going to lose it. It's a very interesting dynamic.
And related to that, each position, let's say that somebody retires or there's a vacancy for some reason. Let's say you've got a person that, you've got a department that is one person short. The way things are set up right now is that request or that vacancy gets to every position gets brought to the county commissioners, and we talk about whether or not to refill that position. Right. And if we elect not to refill that position and we kind of shift things around so that more people are able to focus on the things that count the most, then automatically that budget amount for that paid position, they can't spend it. It automatically gets saved. So you say, well, we're not going to fill that. Well, guess what? The budget that is authorized to expend just got shrunken by that amount until you reauthorize that position. Or if you don't, then you save it for the whole year.
Which is another budget policy. So we have a series of budget policies, all of which have been recommended and developed by the board. And we'll probably touch on a lot of those as we move through. So let's move ahead here. A budget definition. So what is a budget? Well, a budget is actually a rather complicated thing. I have a couple of definitions here, actually 3. First comes from my college dictionary, an itemized summary of probable revenues and expenditures, a systematic plan, and I have that in bold for a reason, for meeting expenses.
So probable means you're predicting the future. You expect this is what you're going to come in, and this is what if that comes in, and you don't have any game changers, this is likely what we're going to spend it on. In fact, unless we change the game plan, this is what we're going to spend it on to the maximum. You can always spend less.
Right. Wikipedia, I kind of like that. An organization plan stated in monetary terms. And then finally, from our own BAR, what we call the BAR system, that's the State Budget and Accounting Reporting System, which is the State Auditor's Office. It's a legal, it's legally binding, I should say, upon how we can expend money. We're very, very structured in how we can spend money. They call it a forecast of expected resources and the purposeful distribution of those scarce resources. And the word budget, just incidentally, comes from the French word for purse, as in purse strings. And,
is that right?
Yeah. So a budget, the reason I've highlighted plan, and forecast is, as David said, in every instance, we're dealing off the future. So the auditor's office is real-time and retrospective. Budgeting is prospective. And that takes on a much bigger meaning in a government where you can't make those quick real-time adjustments because your money's appropriated by law. So you better know what you're doing from the get-go. That's why it is important to underscore the fact that budgeting is very closely related to forecasting and planning. So, from the budget perspective, what is finance? So one of the things I thought was kind of interesting, and I picked this up off of Wikipedia as well, the proper role of government provides a starting point for the analysis of public finance. The proper role of government provides a starting point for the analysis of public finance. So in other words, what they're saying is, what's your mission? And what is your mission is where you start then to analyze how do you want to spend the money that you are collecting from the public.
Which is hugely important because we need to know what are the priorities, what is the purpose, what's the mission statement, really what is the role of county government in this case. Because a lot of things can be are very important to people, but they don't necessarily fall under the jurisdiction or the domain or the level of government for the county. It could very well be a state function or a school function or a fire district function, which is really the county government does not have the fire districts; they're separate. Right. And it could be a federal, and that the identification of where they fall is very important. The mission I look at the mission statement of any governing agency as crucially important, because I'm also a business owner, and as business entrepreneurs, they need to know what they do really well and why do they do it, and they should be able to be the best in the world at doing that, and what they don't do really well. And that is constantly being evaluated, because as any elected official, people are asking, can you do this, can you do that, I'd like people to do this, and it's important to always come back to base. This is what we do, and this is what we don't do. And if you want help in that area, you go over here to this other branch of government. But for this level, you cannot do everything. You have to be able to prioritize. That's the whole judgment call, and being any elected official is sorting out priorities and knowing what the role is and what the role is not.
One of the things I know will resonate with you is in a government, when you've done it long enough, you learn that really you're there to solve problems. And the only way you are going to get yourself down to workable problem statements is to start with a mission. Because if you don't frame what you're doing, you can't even get your problem statement straight. So you're absolutely correct.
Yep. Problem solving. I love problem solving.
I do too.
Raised 3 daughters. They would, typically a daughter would sit down and she would start telling about her problems, and I would say, "Oh, let me to solve it." No, don't solve the problem. Just listen and go, "Ah." But they're not. There are times when they say, "Can you help solve that problem?" And I think, "Yes."
Yeah, I know.
So yes, we want to be able to solve problems, and it's fun and satisfying, and everybody wins when you finally come up with a great solution.
Well, you found the right organization, because you got a whole organization of people who agree with you. So what is the proper role of government, its mission? Well, so really that's asking, why does your government exist? And you get to determine that. You are the policymakers, and within the framework of the law, you determine what is your mission. I have a great answer for that, which I won't share with anybody because it's not my role. But whatever the answer
Actually, I want to hear it. Go ahead and share it. Go ahead.
Well, actually, it turns out that I help the commissioners work on our current mission statement, which is to better serve the will of the citizens.
That's good. The will of the citizens.
That's the highest level statement.
It is.
And then we drop down to, well, what does that mean? And we dropped into areas of to keep our citizens safe, to be transparent, and there's a third leg which I'm not remembering because I'm on television. But I mean, they're very clear and they're very linear, and
actually that's very important too, because respecting the will of the citizens means that as an elected representative, we get our authorization in our cues from those that employ us as their representatives. And we may have a really good idea that we want to be able to do something, we just can envision a solution, feel passionately about it, but if the citizens at the ballot box say, no, we don't want to pay for that, we don't want to do that, then I believe if we're going to really use that definition, that we better serve the will of the citizens, that we pay attention to the ballot box, right, and we do not force what our favorite project may be upon the citizens. We obey, really, the ballot box. Right. This will of the citizens in a representative form of government, which county services are, county government is, that is crucially important, because it would be easy to lose sight of that and just say, I really want this project to go through anyway, therefore I'm not going to pay attention to that election.
Right. That's my belief, and sometimes it's difficult because citizens don't always want the same thing you think they want. But to better serve, in other words, to continuously improve the service to our citizens and to serve their will, I mean, why else does a democratic government exist? So that's where we landed so far, but that may change. It depends upon what you want. But however you answer that question, the budget is the means. That's the what, this is the how. The means is because anything that a government does to fulfill its mission has to happen by moving money. It doesn't, I mean, we can talk about what governments do in a lot of different ways. You know, we have police forces, we do land use, which actually, I will, just as an aside, I might add, county commissioners are probably busier than most other politicians because you have quite a broad role. Most politicians are very closely aligned with where's the money going to go. Most of what we do, both functionally and legally, can be contracted out. Can't contract out the judges, can't contract out the prosecutor. You could, I don't know about police work. I won't go there because sheriff probably get mad at me. But there are many things that you can contract out. You can contract out your jail. We do contract out most of our road construction. I mean, but what you cannot not do and be a government is move money. You are asking citizens for money over here, and you're putting it over there. And that is what a budget does. A budget distributes that funding according to you, according to your mission. So, finance versus the budget. Treasury and accounting, as I said earlier, make up the bulk of finance. But most policymakers' exposure to finance, i.e. your exposure as a commissioner, is going to be via the budget. Treasurers track revenues, auditors track expenses, but budget's what they track against. It takes on a whole new eminence when you put this into the public sector. Private sector, it's very different, and those can be much more closely melded, but here they're not. Budget is, as we have already discussed, an appropriation. It's not cash, it's not money. It's actually easier in a government to run out of cash than it is to run out of appropriation. If you run out of cash, you can find it from another fund.
Define appropriation.
An appropriation is the legal permission to spend money.
Okay.
As long as you have legal permission to spend money, if the cash isn't right there, now you can't be broke. I don't want to overstate this point, but if you're in a small fund and you run out of cash, but you still have appropriation, the auditor's office will fix that. But what can't happen is you can have $1 million in cash sitting in your fund, but if you have an appropriation for $100,000, that's all you spend. Budget is a spending plan. It's a forecast. Now, this following little ditty that I have here was developed by Dick Thompson, who was, among other things, Chief of Staff for Governor Booth Gardner, but he was many other things. He was the head of DSHS. He was the head of Community Development. He's now a regent, I believe, at UW. He's a very wise man.
So he's got a lot of experience because Booth Gardner was, what, like 4 or 5 Washington State governors back, right?
Yeah, Booth came in '84 and he went out in '92. Yeah, and he's a fun governor to work for. But what Dick Thompson would tell us is policy is what you do, underscored or highlighted. You do only what you fund, and you only fund what you budget in a government. So this is something that we share with commissioners a lot. That's policy. Budget's policy.
Yes, and people say that if you want to know what you really believe, look at where you're spending your money. And when it comes to any level of government, we can say this, we can say we support this or we're opposed to that. It doesn't. The bottom line is, where are you spending the money, and what are you advocating for to spend money? So, in politics, we see it where people say, I'm really opposed to this, but, by the way, fund that. And I'm thinking, okay, the bottom line is, when you say fund it, you are for what you're funding. So that transparency, I don't let people get away with that game. I'll call them on it, because if they say you're going to spend the money, that's what you believe. And don't play any games saying you don't really support that. So
it does create certain ironies. I mean, I think I can pick an example that exists a long ways away. If you really don't want people to catch lung cancer and you subsidize tobacco farmers, you got to ask, what do you really believe?
Yeah. Your actions speak louder than words. My dad would always say, that's bred in me, indelibly imprinted. So you're right. It comes. Of course, you're right. I mean, it's like the insight that you fund what you believe in. That's really the bottom line. The buck stops here. That defines what your priorities really are.
And that is what we try to tell each new cohort of commissioners coming in. And sometimes they're very keenly aware of that. Sometimes they've come from places where that's not a thought they've given a lot of consideration to. So this table here simply outlines what our budget calendar is. I won't spend a lot of time on it because I know that we're not all talking to commissioners here. But what it does do is it details for folks that may be in the audience that we have a very, very strict schedule that we follow with our budget calendar that's driven by statute, like just about everything else we do. Very few things that happen in county finance are random. They are controlled right down to the detail.
And if you have a budget for the year, there's the checks and balances that go along with the process of watching that. Also looks at the proportionality over the year. If you got to be able to last 12 months, you make sure you're not going to spend it all in the first 2 or 3.
Correct.
So that is also one of the functions of the budgeting office, to make sure that it's evenly spent, or should I say, it's at least spent according to the schedule that was agreed upon up front.
Yes, this is the end of that same table. I just want to direct your attention to these fund names down here. The reason I want to is because I've mentioned a couple times the county has several funds. The county actually has well over 100 funds, and you might consider each fund a business. They're accounted for separately, and they fall into different categories. The largest fund that the county has is the general fund. The general fund in Clark County runs at about $140 or $150 million per year out of the 450 or 460.
So a little over 25%. What is it, about 28%?
About a third. It actually works out to be about a third.
So that's pretty good, the general fund, because that means that's more flexibility. Although when it's all said and done at the end of the year, you have excess that you've saved over that year, and it's in your general fund. Mm-hmm. It says, hey, now we have the flexibility to take those savings and put them toward the priorities that really is going to move your county forward, versus one of the other funds.
Right. In the other funds, the money is much more restricted in how it can be spent. Generally, every other fund has restricted funding in it. Restricted means it's either restricted in how it's expended by statute, which is dedicated funding, or it's restricted by contract, which is just simply restricted. You can't spend it anywhere else, or else you're breaking a contract. I'll just go through these very quickly for you. Capital funds are we load money from wherever is an appropriate source, and there are many legal definitions of what's an appropriate source, but we load money into the capital funds so that we can pay debt service out of those funds and keep track of them separately. We have special revenue funds. Those are funds where we are able to take in money that is very specific to a certain function and then spend it only on that function. Our road fund, which is a fund that takes in gas tax revenues, property tax revenues, grants, as we discussed earlier, is a special revenue fund, but it may only be expended on the construction or maintenance of roads.
Which means that if you're going to get a grant, for instance, from the state or from the federal treasury, that comes with strings, it comes with designation. You say you can use it here, but you don't have the freedom to move it to some other area. You need to be able to use it for what was intended for.
And they're very strict about that. And we are audited on that routinely. Similarly, we have something called an enterprise fund. An enterprise fund is a fund where it does totally function as a business, where we have I'm drawing a blank right now about what's the easiest enterprise fund for me to grab here, but we used to have, and we just changed this, so it's probably not the best example. We used to have our geographic information systems in an enterprise fund, where all the revenue that they collected was fee-based for the services that they provided, and it was expended solely on what they did in geographic information systems, or GIS. And that was all self-contained. That money can't be spent anywhere else, and it is a completely separate set of books. There are some provisions of special revenue funds for the transfer funds, but not in an enterprise fund. Similarly, go ahead. So
the enterprise fund is, for instance, if you have, let's say, a health center like the Furstenberg Center, which is the city, it's not county. It's run like a business, but it's supposed to, and I would assume that there's an assumption that goes into any kind of an enterprise fund that it probably ought to be self-sufficient. It should be. It shouldn't require funds to keep funding to do something. It should be generating its own revenue to pay for those services.
That is correct.
So it's run like a profitable business if it's done right. So one of the red flags would be if you've got an enterprise fund and you keep in a supplement money in from something else that says we better take a look at that because it's a failing business.
Right, exactly. Internal service funds are funds that are set up internally within the organization in order to provide exactly that, internal services. But their funding source tends to come from other departments in the county. A very popular internal service fund would be information services. Everybody chips in a little from all the different funds that we have in the county in order to get everybody information services. So that gives you an idea of how we split up our money. There are numerous funds. All of them are tracked separately. All of them have to foot and tick, as they say.
Okay.
So now we're going to talk about where our counties right now. Our world changed, actually. The county world changed pretty dramatically here in 2008, and actually that change was set up a good deal earlier. Let me give you a quick backdrop about what we just got done talking about so people sort of know where we are with revenues
So the
and
economic
expenditures.
crisis that hit the world and certainly hit the United States in 2000, the latter part of 2008, really has so far has permanently changed the way that we do government. It's a game changer in how we do what we don't do in comparison. We used to be fat city when it comes to lots of revenue, many different things, and the proactive history that Clark County has gone through to not go into the red like many counties did do in Washington State. We kind of led the way. You were there during that whole transition, and we're not in trouble compared to the number of counties that did get into trouble.
Yeah, counties are inherently conservative, and I would say that probably more cities were pinched harder than counties because of the conservative nature of a county and how we're so regulated. But essentially, yes, you are correct. It's interesting, though, that 2008 wasn't so much the cause as it was the light. The cause was several years earlier, and we will talk about that in a moment.
Okay.
A very brief review. So revenues by source. Where do the revenues in a county come from? Well, about a third of revenues are from taxes. These green parts that are pulled out are the tax revenues that we receive out of our whole pie. Unrestricted, the revenues that we can spend or that you as a county commission can spend on pretty much whatever you choose that's legal is only 20% of our total collections. Then you can see that we have other large categories. We have a big category of charges for service where we're actually charging either other governments or, in some cases, citizens for services that are provided. We receive quite a bit of grant revenue. This used to be our fastest growing category of revenue. I haven't checked it just
Which
these days. Grants.
Grants.
Transfers. It's an interesting fact in budget writing in a county that you can't that you have to count every dollar that's expended. So, for example, if the road fund legally transfers $1 to the general fund, the road fund expends $1, the general fund receives $1. It's a revenue expended or revenue received. If the general fund then transfers that money to an internal service fund, it spends $1. And
so there's two entries for everything that happens. Where it's coming from, where it's going.
Or 4. It depends on how many times that dollar moves.
They come in pairs.
Right. So about 20% of our budget, if you look at it, you have to be careful. If you look at the total budget that we have of about $900 million for 2 years, about 20% of that's just going to be money moving around inside.
And even in each of these areas here, let's say, for instance, grants, I had somebody say, well, you know, as a commissioner, you really don't have that much say-so over things. You can maybe change the budget, maybe 2% or maybe 3%, and everything else is all spoken for. Not true. What grants you go after and what projects that you champion, really, it is so much of that is your discretion. When it comes to what agreements that you make with, for instance, with cities and with the state, especially with cities. For instance, the services that the city of Vancouver provides, and we pay for those. The county actually transfers funds to the city, and the county does things for the city of Vancouver. So the county bills the city of Vancouver, and the city of Vancouver actually pays the county for those services. So those agreements between who's going to provide what, for instance, the parks. Right now there's kind of a regional park thing. There's the city does part and the county does part. And that's all right now we're looking at that to see maybe that stays together, maybe we'll separate it out, but we'll determine how well that's working because you got different people in charge of each area. So the way I see it, there is a lot of flexibility in setting priorities. I would also, you talked about the form of government a little bit earlier. I found it very fascinating to see the difference, the uniqueness of county government compared to any other form of government in the United States. The three branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial. The executive carries out the wishes of and executes what the legislators set and define as law. Legislators are lawmakers, judicials are the law enforcers.
Correct.
And the county government is unique. I thought you always kept those branches apart. because anytime you combine them together, you don't have checks and balances, and it's danger because power corrupts absolutely. But it was interesting to see, to me, that legislative and executive branches, those two branches, are combined together, united in county commissioners.
Correct.
The county commissioners are the CEOs. They can designate a county administrator to be able to execute, but there are a number of counties within Washington State that don't have county administrators. The county commissioners are the administrators.
Right.
So you read the executive branch and the legislative branch together, which is quite an entrustment of power and authority in the hands of a very few people. The uniform form of government for counties in Washington State, only 3 people.
Right.
And so you only need 2 people to do huge things.
Right.
It's
That's a very correct statement, and it's why many people will tell you that county commissioners are some of the most powerful politicians in the state, because within their domain, they are both the legislature and the governor. And contrary to how people sometimes perceive of a county, they're actually very fleet of foot for that reason. You can make decisions very rapidly and move through them. And all of this check and balance that you see built around the budget process and so forth are a help or an aid to that. You know, if you have a combined executive legislative branch, then you have to have other kinds of checks and balances to make sure that everything goes apace, and it does. I want to make one quick correction here. I kind of pointed wrong. This is a third. That's tax dollars right there. There's a little slice of charges for service that fall into this unrestricted category. So we have many taxes that come in. We can't spend them on anything but what they're dedicated for. Then we have an unrestricted slice of funds out of the whole pie, most of which is from taxes, which are unrestricted.
great.
And move on.
Just to wrap up the form of government thing, one last little bit on that, and that is the county is a pretty big engine. Yeah. It's a big government. I mean, it's 1,500 people or staff employees. It includes the judges and law enforcement, sheriff, and so many of the different things. And so it's like an aircraft carrier. Yet, it can move with the nimbleness of a little fighter jet because it can be steered overnight into a completely different direction. So those individuals that think, everything stays the same, you can't really change anything, not true for county government.
No, sir. We in 2008, when Lehman Brothers came down, we knew things were different. By the middle of 2009, we had recognized we were headed toward a 20% loss in revenue, and we had cut 15% of our staff.
Which was a very painful process, but it was proactive to the point where Clark County went through that whole process and still stayed in the black. You guys really did a very, very good job being proactive with that. So we got to move on.
We do. We're having too much fun here.
Yeah.
So, restricted revenue, general fund, and others, that's what this is entitled. Virtually all unrestricted revenue is in the general fund. So this is our total revenue pie again, which I just showed you. You can see that we have the general fund, which is only about a third, and that's represented by this circle here, is actually got restricted funding in it as well. There's only about 2/3 of the general fund, which you, the county commission, can spend in an unrestricted fashion, meaning any way that's legal. About 1/3 of the money in the general fund is restricted, again, either by contract or by statute, even though it's in the general fund. A perfect example of that is the contracts you mentioned with the city. One of my departments is the Information Services Department. We provide contracted services to the city of Vancouver, and they pay us for that. It goes into the general fund. We don't have to spend that money on the City of Vancouver services, but we probably wouldn't get much of a contract from them next year. So it's that kind of a restriction that exists above and beyond or in addition to statutory restrictions. So there it is.
And a lot of these are restricted simply because of the setting of the priorities by the commissioners.
Absolutely.
To be able to enter into those agreements in the first place. So I just want to make sure that people don't get the wrong impression that, it means it's because it's restricted, means that it's beyond the control of the commissioners. No, the commissioners are the ones that set those restrictions, many of them. Some of them are just simply set by the state. We are a creature of the state, an extension of the state legislature. We are the counties, governments get their authority from the state and must comply with whatever the state says.
Well, yeah, as they say, an arm of state government. The implementing arm, I like to say. So that's the revenue picture. So just in summary, about a third of our money comes from taxes. About 80% of our money is restricted. Almost all of the unrestricted money, in fact, virtually all the unrestricted money is in the general fund. The general fund is about a third of total revenues, and even that, only two-thirds of that may be expended in an unrestricted fashion. Now we're talking about expenses. Where do we spend most of our money? This is the general fund. We're going to focus primarily on the general fund. And the reason for that is it's by far the largest fund. It's the fund that people identify as government. It's the one that funds all of our elected officials. It funds virtually everything that you expect a county to do except the roads department. And we will not get into roads in any great depth here today only because time would not allow. But this is very indicative of how a county functions. And you will see, and this presentation is not just Clark County, it's written for counties all around the state. Very typically, you're going to see counties spending upwards of 3/4, even 80% of their money on law and justice, which is the judges, the prosecutor, well, the judges, I should say, both the Superior and District Court, the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's office, the jail, and juvenile. There's there are a few other things like indigent defense, for example, is a very costly, constitutionally required expense. All that gets lumped into criminal justice.
So if people were perfectly behaved, we would save a lot of money.
We would.
The fact that we're human and we don't always get it right means that, well, sorry, we have to pay for that.
If you want Clark County to cost less, obey the law.
Yeah. Or help those individuals that just are frequent flyers to be able to somehow get the help, change the heart, mentor them so that now they become productive, responsible citizens. And that's a challenge. That is something that we want to be able to really do what we can to change behavior as best we can. So but everybody wins when that happens.
That's correct. So you can see that the vast majority of money goes to our law and justice, to public safety, as we oftentimes call it. The next largest category is general government. That is virtually every other department you might think of. That's the auditor, the assessor, the treasurer. It's the commissioner's department. It's the budget office. It's all the internal service offices. It's the public or the human resources department. Everything we need to run internally.
That's basically overhead. That's the basic overhead.
Right. Well, and more than that. I mean, it includes you. I don't know if I would put the commissioners exactly in overhead. That's executive leadership. How about that?
It's the cost of doing business.
It is. Fiscal entities, we run, for example, our own insurance. So we're self-insured. That's where that money is stored.
And that's interesting because that self-insure, we're not standing alone in that self-insurance. That whole risk pool or risk management, we band together with a number of other counties so that if one county gets hit by a big lawsuit or something, a settlement, that just doesn't sink that one county. There's a pool that is shared between counties, right? Do you know how many? Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. With that pool, the insurance pool that you're talking about, I don't know how many counties are in there, but it's a number of counties in the state of Washington, many of the larger counties, and they provide liability insurance for the county, for tort liability and that sort of thing, and they will pay down to a certain level. I believe our cutoff is $500,000, but please don't put that. Edit that
You're
out.
guessing, okay?
Yeah, but then we have to be able to
cover. Level.
Yeah, I mean, if the settlement is less than that, we have to pay it.
Okay, so basically it's to cover the big catastrophic situations.
We also run our own workers' comp insurance. So
really separate from the state.
Yeah, we find that it's less costly and more efficient. So
most do for Washington State.
Yeah. So we do that. And then finally, and I may have actually made a blunder here. I think general government was the elected departments. Internal support would be the HR and the true overhead.
Okay, so you've broken it down.
Yeah. And then finally, parks is the last big category of money in the general fund. So that's how those monies are expended, mostly to law and justice. Law and justice is certainly the 800-pound gorilla in our expenditure budget. Okay, so here's what you were asking about.
Let me back up here a minute, because what we don't see here is the social services.
That's because they're not in the general fund.
Okay.
In fact, social services weren't really a part of county functions until the Depression. What ended up happening there is counties had something called poor farms, which were really kind of de facto mental health institutions. And early in the century, the state made some exchanges. They said, we'll take over the cost of those in exchange for getting all the liquor tax, which at that point was collected solely by counties. And so they got the liquor tax, and then they took the poor farms, the mental health function away, and started to fund that until it got really expensive, and then they gave us a lot of that back. But there's still state funding that comes in. So there's a history of state funding that comes down for drug and alcohol treatment and mental health services and services to the poor and infirm that is non-general fund, almost solely funded by the state and heavily governed by the state. So it's money that exists in a different category because it is almost controlled by the state legislature as opposed to the county commission, and we're a pass-through.
And it's mandated by the state that says you can't turn people away. You have to meet their needs, whether or not you have the money. You have to make sure their needs are met. You said the poor farms, being the history, started out with the history, basically meeting the compassionate need for citizens that basically have no other means to support themselves. Isn't it? I think the Heritage Farm off of 78th Street started out as a poor farm.
That's
right?
correct.
Are there any others in Clark County?
Not in Clark County, although the McMinimans out in
was
an old
Oregon?
poor farm. Yeah,
Like Gresham area.
Yeah.
That has quite a history. If anybody ever get a chance to go out to, was it McMinimans? Is that?
It's McMinimans, and it's
Edgefield.
Yes, that's correct.
That's they got pictures all over the place. It's an amazing history to see how that has the roots of our social services. And the social services, it is a big deal for Clark County. Yeah. Do you know about what the cost? We got an RSN. It's a regional service network we just formed.
Let me throw something else out there for you.
Maybe $40 or $50 million a year, guessing something like that we're spending on social services.
When you take all of our social services and combine them, that's drug and alcohol,
mental illness,
veterans, mental illness, all that. When you combine all of them together, except for public health, I'm holding out here. The last number I remember, they were up on, and this is a little dated, they were more than $50 million per year.
So that's a huge sum of money.
It's a big number.
I didn't realize that one of the largest facilities in all of Clark County is off of 4th Plain, just east of the 5 freeway, Building 17, monstrous building. Mm-hmm. That parking lot is many times bigger than a Walmart. It's just stuffed full of cars where people are being helped in a number of ways from addictions and you name it.
Right. It's big business,
and
it's something that we're required to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have public health, which is yet another very, and I don't have that number off the top of my head what their budget's like, but I will add, just as long as we're talking about it, that those programs have been hit hard. Public health, probably the hardest. Public health literally has been cut in half in the last 5 years.
Which is hard. That whole thing could be its own interview because really the social services, it just seems that the government, no level of government really has adequate funds to really take care of it, and they've been cut and cut. And this is an opportune time. I think we're going to be seeing over the next several months and years, really, that where nonprofit volunteer organizations are going to step in and help fill the gap to do what government hasn't really afforded to do, at least not now. And actually there's an advantage there in a number of respects. There are some things that nonprofits cannot do, but one of the advantages that they do bring to the table that really government services have not been very good at is they can develop relationships with their clientele. With individuals, you have individuals that are normally involved with the nonprofits because they care about people. They're normally they're not there because they're getting for the money. They're really sacrificing to be there. So they're serving people, and part of that service enables them to build relationships with them, get to know them, really help them on a way that is normally much more fruitful than a government program. Mm-hmm. So it really is an opportunity. So all bad news is not necessarily all bad news.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that $50 million a year, which again is probably a dated number, most of that money, most of what we do in Clark County, most of the county employees that we have are simply contract managers for contracts with private nonprofits to do exactly what you're saying.
That is true. Yeah. So it's not like we have to all of a sudden switch to nonprofits. There are already a number of nonprofits. dominantly so
Yeah.
in servicing that area, but there are so many more, I believe, that are going to be getting involved, and maybe on smaller scales.
Yeah, we have, but you're very correct. Those are, and they're a far more efficient way to provide services too.
Very resourceful.
So, what we want to talk about now is something we alluded to quite a few ticks back in our discussion here. Is when did the world change for counties? Well, right now, just to give you sort of the historical or the current, I should say, backdrop of where we are, counties right now are at 2006 revenue levels. One of the things that's difficult for people to understand is if you have a family of 5, things like population growth and inflation don't mean as much as if you have a family of 450,000 people that are growing at a 1 or 2% per year. And inflation, that means, you really do have to replace that road, or you really do have to take that prisoner to the hospital. I mean, inflation and population growth are very real things to us. Mm-hmm. So when we're in 2013 looking at 2006 or so budget levels, that's a dramatic statement, a very dramatic statement.
We have to be able to do things bring in a level of efficiency, and also determine what are you not going to do that we used to do, right, in order to focus on those things we absolutely have to do and do very well.
So this is the way the decade broke out for us. 2000 to 2007, our revenues were growing at 4% per year. Some counties were doing better than that.
That's very healthy.
In 2007 to 2010, we lost revenues at the rate of 2% per year, again against continuing population growth, continuing inflation. For 11 and 12, our most recent biennium, and just very incidentally, we schedule our budgets in 2-year cycles. So we don't actually budget for 12 months, we budget for 24. 2011 and 2012, growth in most counties, including Clark County, was flat. We didn't have any growth, but we didn't lose money. Just incidentally, I've mentioned already, road funds are a separate large fund that we aren't going to talk a lot about, but those also have been flat since 2007. For other counties, I make the point that these averages do significantly understate the extremes. We've had counties that have been losing population for a long time, and this recession was very hard on them. We have counties that are letting roads return to gravel.
I'm very pleased that that's not happening here, and the Clark County continues to grow, even during this recession. People are not fleeing out of Clark County, not on a net basis, rather than like they are out of California. Right. Huge numbers of businesses are fleeing out of there because of the unfriendly situation there, and they're going somewhere. Yeah. And if we can do this right, if we can make this county all that it can be, and we can adapt, we can change the way we ought to be able to change. Welcome home to your new free enterprise, happy zone here in Clark County. That is an opportunity that I'm looking forward to working with the other commissioners and with the staff to help that to happen. Good.
And that's exactly where we want to be with you. What happened? Exactly. Jobs is what everybody wants right now. Mm-hmm. So what happened? Those are, notwithstanding that they don't seem like big numbers, they're real numbers, and they are dramatic. Counties, governments in general, but counties in specific, are predicated on very steady, very slow growth. That's how they're built. And not seeing that creates havoc, which we have dealt with rather well, I'd like to say. Mm-hmm. But let's explain to ourselves, why did that happen? Well, revenue declines in the counties, all of the counties now I'm talking about in the state, have been due mainly to less new construction, or the loss of new construction, which occurred after the housing boom bust, mm-hmm. after the housing bust, after the however you would choose to say that.
You said it well.
So the way counties are put together, most of our revenue growth comes from new construction. In other counties, it might be slightly different, very highly urbanized counties, but generally, new construction drives all of our property tax growth over 1%. In Clark County, 1% increase in property taxes is about $400,000 a year. On a $50 million budget, that's really not a lot of money.
Say that again. How much? You said $400,000.
If we are legally allowed to increase property taxes.
Oh, you're talking about the increase in property tax.
If you choose, we can go up 1% without having to go for a public vote, and everything above that 1% because property taxes have historically grown at a greater clip than that, is driven by new construction.
Yes. In fact, I looked at that for Clark County in 2005. The growth in the assessed value, in other words, how much is all the property worth in Clark County, has increased by over 26% from 2005 to 2011 or 12, and that growth wasn't due to 1% tax increases for property taxes. It was actually due to new construction.
Right.
So if we are not growing, then we are stagnating or we're declining.
That's right.
And that loss represents it just will cripple a county. And so the compensation would be, well, we got to raise the rate of property taxes in order to help patch the hole, which is, to me, unacceptable, because why in the world is I believe there needs to be some correlation between how is the economy doing, in the job market, the business market in your county doing. Well, it also shrunk. And when that shrinks, we can't say, well, you got to give more, because we won't shrink. We have to be able to somehow get as lean like business has. I think for us to be able to keep raising the rate of property taxes is the wrong direction. Rather, to welcome the growth and the development of new, you're developing properties that were sitting at vacant land levels, and now you put a building on there, you put a house on there, and now it's appraised higher, so therefore you got more revenue coming in. Everybody wins a lot of those times. The process of building that creates jobs, and if it's some kind of a facility or building that now serves as the employment location for someone, now you got employees. And all that generates revenue for the local economy and revenue for the county.
Correct. So, to summarize, all property tax growth and any property tax collections that we collect at Clark County will if they increase, they will primarily be driven by new construction, which only costs the people that are coming in the same tax rate everybody else is paying.
Which is the gatekeeper. The county is the gatekeeper. If you make that process expensive, long, difficult, it's not going to happen. Or it's going to be greatly throttled back. And so that is, in the long run, you don't have a sustainable income. You're going to keep just stagnating. So one of the passionate things that I believe we need to be able to do is to make it quick and easy and streamlined within the limits of the law to ensure that we make the customer successful. We welcome that and say, can I help you? My job is to make your job easy, to get you going so that you can build, because we all win when that happens.
You're right.
And I was very encouraged today. Today, the county was launched a new, what we call lean process to really streamline that.
The permitting process.
The permitting process. Great direction. That's exciting, because the floodgates are going to open here, that we can get those jobs flowing back into our county.
Well, I'll be ready and prepared to budget those funds, just so you know.
That's great.
So, just so you know, though, that new construction does drive the property tax collections proper, but it also drives up to a third of our sales tax revenues, because sales taxes are expended every time somebody buys materials to build a house or a building or whatever it is that they may be constructing. Related to new construction is the real estate excise tax. The real estate excise tax is like a sales tax on the sales of a home or a building. It's much lower. I think it's 1.78%. And it's the tax that's charged when an existing building changes hands. So it's not new construction, but if you're going to move into a new building, you're probably going to sell your old building.
Yep. You go through your escrow, and you settle the buyer gets their money, and part of that was you just paid real estate excise taxes. It's called REET, R-E-E-T, real estate excise. What was there? What's the second E?
Oh, real estate
excise tax.
Yeah. There you go. So that's another one that's a very useful fund for the county. It's not one of the largest, but it's one of the most fluid. And then finally, development fees, the process that David just referred to of permitting, that we're trying to make cheaper, faster, better. is also one that is funded by fees almost entirely, or it had been historically, and so development fees also fall away for that. So what happens is that...
Which is, I hope that one of my passions is to be able to somehow remove those fees, because they make up less than 1% of the revenue to the county. Is that right, Glenn?
That would be correct.
The county budget. So yet that could potentially hold up the vast majority of development, because the developers are thinking, gosh, I don't have the money for that. And it would take me how much just to get the permit? And that if you can remove that deterrent, and the developer, the builder can say, well, you mean the fees go to zero? Really? Mm-hmm. Hey, let's go to work, because maybe it won't stay that way. Let's develop. And so what you do is, if you can do that and not raise taxes, and nope, we're not going to raise taxes, then the argument goes away that says, well, you're just passing the cost on to other taxpayers. No, you haven't passed any cost on to the other taxpayers, because you saved it. And in the long run, that new construction is going to bring in more income, sustainable income, year after year after year, if you can break it loose in the first place. So I see that as priming the pump. Do we need to be able to prime the pump with the general revenue that comes into the county without the fees? Yeah, I think we do. Not for everything, not for the super high density stuff that's going to really tax our infrastructure, but certainly with those job creating positions, single family residences, those are that proportionally are good for parks and good for schools and good for transportation and good for job creation.
And as you know, there's a current discussion going on right now that you've instigated at the county, and I think you're probably onto something there.
I like instigating. And actually, I can see that there's actually a lot of support within the county staff to do these things, because we all will win. The county staff will win too, because we all grow more healthy as the economy, as people get more jobs, they get enriched, the economy is more enriched, and the revenue is there to be able to actually have a healthy county government.
Mm-hmm. So, in summary, that's where our major revenue decline came from, all these things related to new construction. Now, other revenues, like the 2/3 of sales tax that are not driven by new construction, flattened or declined after 2007 because the economy was down, consumer behavior. Mm-hmm. So sure. we really did get clobbered. We lost about 20% of our revenue.
Yeah, and that's, to a large degree, that's the whole nation going up and down. Mm-hmm. But within that whole nation going up and down, kind of like the overall tide, we can have a bright spot here, mm-hmm. or we can have a stagnation here, depending on what we do locally. So that local control, that local environment that really are set by our own policies will determine how we fare compared to the rest of the nation, the rest of the economy. Mm-hmm. This can be a bright spot or a dim spot. Let's make it bright.
Yeah, that's true. So there was also a structural change. Now, this is what I meant when I said that the real change didn't happen in 2008. It was illuminated in 2008. The structure of county revenues changed because the voters decided to change it. Property taxes in the county, in every county, had been growing without a vote of the public by 6% per year for a very, very long time.
That's a lot of growth.
It is a lot of growth. Now, there's a historical context. Inflation used to be much higher. Prior to the 1980s, we had inflation bouncing all over the place, and then, as you know, we had some meta-inflation during the 70s. And so 6%, you always want to compare that core of funding for the county, because counties really are based on property taxes, to what's inflation doing. Well, inflation started slowing down in the 90s to a very manageable clip, and we had on the books, we had the law that we could go up 6% per year, and finally the state budget writers put it to the citizens and asked them, the state legislature, I guess, the budget writers in the legislature asked them, do you want to do that? Not surprisingly, they said they didn't. What they did say is you can have a 1% increase in property taxes each year. And actually, the way the law reads is you can have a 1% increase or the implicit price deflator, a measure of inflation, whichever's less. So that's where the law changed. It changed a long time ago. And what that did is it took the core of county revenues and it really depressed them. But we didn't see that change because at exactly the same moment that we changed how we can increase the amount of revenue collected on properties, we had this big boom. And referring back to the prior slide, that meant all this new construction coming in. So it took the place of those increases, and from a county budget writer's perspective, it didn't look a lot different, even though we knew in the back of our mind. So it was structural. What that meant is that we actually had a structural change on our revenues. In the past, it was possible to get 6% per year. We most typically did. Now we're limited to 1%.
Can I just say something about that property taxes? Because there's a lot of misunderstanding about how property taxes work. A lot of people think that the law says my property taxes can't go up more than 1% per year. In reality, that's not true at all. The property taxes has to do with add up all the value of all the property in Clark County, and you end up with a number, $6 billion or something. And the way the county property taxes are set is that, okay, you define that number, and you add to that any new property that's been developed, and so that ends up with the number, and that's the size of the pie. And your house may be one slice, but these individual pieces of property are all being evaluated or valuated. Their value is being set by the county assessor.
Correct. On
a regular basis. And so your slice of the pie could be a little bit bigger this year, a little bit smaller compared to other properties within that whole pie.
Right.
So your property taxes can go way down in 1 year, or they could go way up in 1 year without limit. It could be 40, 50% higher than the previous time. But it's just the overall size of the pie, if you don't include new construction, can only increase by 1%.
That's right. So the pie, as you're calling it, is what we call the levy. The tax levy is only allowed to grow at 1% per year. That means that on $1 million in tax, we actually literally look at how much did we collect last year. Well, if last year we collected $1 million, which we collected more than that, but if we collected $1 million, then this year we can only collect $1,010,000. And that's all that levy can grow. Then you add in new construction, and that creates a new base that can only grow at 1% per year. So the levy, what happens with your housing value is, depending upon how your housing value changed compared to all your neighbors, depends upon how that levy gets split up. If your housing value doubled and all your neighbors' housing values doubled, your property taxes will go up exactly 1%. If your housing value doubled and all theirs fell in half, your property taxes are going to go up a lot.
Yes. So if there's really no change from the relative value of your house compared to anybody else's house, and the commissioners elected not to raise property taxes that year, then your property taxes ought to be just the same, right?
Zero.
But we're in a unique situation right now, and that the housing bubble has reduced the value of homes, and there is we do run into a limit, and we're just about there now. Isn't there a $5.90 limit that says if your value of your home gets below this value, and this total number that we want to collect exceeds a certain amount, then you end up with dollars per thousand of hitting the threshold.
You actually have two thresholds. You've talked about both of them. We have what's called the 590 limit, which means when the sum of all of our local taxes, cannot come to what the millage rate is really what you're referring to. It cannot be more than $5.90 per $1,000 of valuation in the county. If we start bumping up against that limit, and there's some other smaller limits, then we actually have to do what's called a proration, which means we have to reduce collections from, and there's a statutory list of things that we cut first, second, third, and fourth, depending on the statute. There's also a rule that says under no circumstances shall any property taxes exceed 1% of the value of that property.
And that includes
all taxes, state taxes, everything except voted levies.
Okay, voted levies. In other words, people can still bypass that. If they say, I want a school bond, or a school levy, I want to be able to have library, whatever, or I want to be able to do whatever, like you name it, a park. You can vote that on top of that. Yes. So there's really no limit as to how high your taxes can go if you vote it that way. But unless you specifically take the lid off of that, you're limited to this much and this much only.
Right.
And the county just by force has to balance the budget, and it has to cut by law. It just simply says, and here's the formula.
And we only get to collect up to $590, and that's it.
And we're close to that now, right?
Yeah, it depends upon, different areas have, because it's such a complicated geographic region with different taxing districts overlapping each other, but in some areas we're right up there, right up against that limit.
You at this point, we're about halfway through this thing.
Maybe.
Yeah, if that. And so you know what we're going to have to do? We're going to have to break this up into another section and come back and do the other portion of it. So if this is a break point, that's good. If there's another break point, or if there's an area that we're getting close to a break point, why don't we call it there?
Okay. Let me see. Let me just take a quick look here. I think that this would be a good place to stop. That what we had going on in Clark County for the last decade was a structural increase that was imposed on the county starting in the late 1990s and finalized in 2002 with a vote of the people that said we're going to have a 1% limit on levy increases, that we just got done discussing.
What year was that?
2002.
Okay.
And when that passed, we finally decided as a citizenry that we can't afford 6%, which was a pretty reasonable conclusion.
Sure was.
Counties, however, are designed to be property tax based. That 6% limit, incidentally, that was set in 1845. It wasn't new.
Really?
Yeah.
It survived that long?
It's constitutional.
Wow.
Very interesting. And also, the tax rates we pay 2.25 per thousand for roads and $1.80 per thousand for homes, 1845.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow. So that change was actually a constitutional amendment that was provided, or that got implemented because of a Tim Eyman initiative?
Actually, no. We still have the 6% on the books. What changed is how you can get to the 6%. It used to be that you could do it councilmatically, meaning by a vote of the council or a vote of the county commission. Now, anything over 1%, you have to go to a vote of the people. But the 6% still exists on the books.
Oh, okay. All right. So basically, we created another kind of a ceiling.
A check.
So the Constitution still says that, but we've got another check
Right.
that says, which is, I was back in California when they passed Proposition 13, and they set their limit to 1% per year, and they also rolled it back.
Right.
And that was a big deal.
Right.
For California, and it changed a lot there.
Right. Functioned very differently than ours. I won't bore you with the details, but you're right. It was a big deal. Mm-hmm. So just so you know, that counties in the state originally only had property tax. So when I say typically 40 to 50% of county general fund revenues and that counties are designed to be property tax based, that's what I mean. Mm-hmm. Originally, that was all the money they got.
In other words, there was no sales tax.
There was no sales tax. There was the liquor tax, and the state got that. And
there was no
but there was
real
the property tax.
Excise tax. So we've got multiple taxes, gas taxes we've got since then.
Right.
And so that is proportionally made the property taxes, what, about 40% of the revenue coming in?
That's a fairly safe guess, okay. Yeah. So anyway, all of that change was masked by new construction. And so here we are now. Okay. The new construction's gone, and we're looking at that structural revenue change and a new era.
So if we want to regain our health in both our local economy and our job creation of jobs, and we want a healthy county government that can fulfill all the services that the citizens are expecting, then we really need to welcome new construction. Otherwise, we're going to have to cut back and say, okay, pick one. Stagnation and decline, or cutting back, or health and new growth. Pick one.
Right. And as in all things, there's a balance.
Yep. Great.
All right.
Okay, with that, we'll come back to do the other portion of this. Hopefully we'll get to it in one sitting for the other, if this is a half or a third. But in any case, this has been a very educational experience for me, and I hope it's been interesting for the individuals or for the people that have been tuning into this. I find it so fascinating. I think that because you're in this field, you must find it fascinating as well. But I'm not going to assume this is going to be boring to people, because this is insight that you just don't hear out there in the community. All we know is we're paying the bills, and we don't know what the checks and balances are and how it all works on the internal. And I find it's refreshing to hear how this all happens internally. So thank you for developing all this. I'll look forward to participating, walking through the rest of this with you, because there's a lot of rich stuff here.
Well, I'm glad you liked it, and I'd be happy to come back.
Any closing statements?
No, other than I really do want folks to know that we care because we're citizens too.
Yes, absolutely. And I can verify that is what I have found as the new guy in the block in the county commissioner role that I'm in. So well done, and we'll revisit it in a very short time here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Good.